The arrest of Radovan Karadzic reminds many of the tragic events of July of 1995 in Srebrenica, especially those who lived through it. In 1992, Bosnia erupted into war, pitting neighbors against one another as they struggled for control of land and political power. The international community responded. The United Nations sent troops and established safe havens throughout the country where UN observation posts would help protect Bosnian Muslim communities. But in 1995, the safe haven town of Srebrenica was attacked by the Bosnian Serb army. What followed has been called the worst case of genocide in Europe since World War II. Sejdefa Dozic was just 10 years old when she witnessed the Srebrenica massacre in Bosnia. Before the war, she had lived a normal childhood. Her father was a cook at a hotel in Srebrenica. Her mother took care of her and her younger brother, and extended family of grandparents, aunts and uncles, and cousins all lived nearby. And I talked with Sejdefa in 2005 on the 10-year anniversary of the Srebrenica massacre. At the time, she was invited to address a group at the United Nations at the invitation of Bosnia's UN ambassador. Sejdefa explains that what she remembers about living in the so-called safe haven community of Srebrenica.
We as children were explained that we can start school, we can play outside, we should not be afraid of bombings. And we were explained that our city was to be protected by the UN troops.
And when did you notice that breaking down? When did people begin to say, you know what, things are going wrong here?
I don't remember that Srebrenica was ever safe. I don't remember that there was time where we were not bombarded or that somebody was not killed or things like that. I just don't remember that there was a day when it was completely safe for us to go to school and not to be afraid. Every morning our parents would tell us, watch out, you need to be careful.
And did you know when Srebrenica was basically under siege there for some days before the massacre where the humanitarian aid was cut off? Do you remember that?
Well, first of all, even though Srebrenica was called safe haven and safe zone, it was, in my opinion and from my experience, it was the most dangerous place for anybody, especially last couple days leading towards July the 11th. From my house, we were able to see how Serb troops were positioning on the hills overlooking the town and overlooking the small villages around Srebrenica. And last couple of days, we were bombarded constantly. We did not go to school. We could not leave house.
And you were a little outside of Srebrenica proper?
I was like a kilometer away from the center of the town.
And you could see the troops massing up there. Did people say, well, normally they shell a lot and then they come into town and this is about to happen here?
Yes, we heard a lot of rumors. We heard that we were going to be attacked. We believed they're Serb troops. We knew for sure that they were not our troops because we did not have Srebrenica troops. When UN came, they disarmed these few men who were fighting, trying to protect us.
And what happened when the troops started coming into town?
The first time I saw Serb troops coming into the town is when we were in Potočari. We were sitting on the street and we saw a few Chetniks, few Serbs, coming down one of the hills, and they came in, walked through the crowd, and a few minutes later what we saw is they were standing in front of us, in front of me and my family, and they took weapons, clothes, and vehicles from UN soldiers who offered no resistance whatsoever. When they took their vehicles, they headed in the direction where Muslim men were headed.
What did your family think about this when, how many people are in your family there?
It was me, my brother, my mother, my grandmother, my aunt, and her 2 children.
What did they think when they saw the troops just disarm the UN and move along?
we believed that we would be protected. We believed that we were safe. The UN was there. We thought they would never allow anything bad to happen. They would never allow anybody to be killed. We thought it would be such a shame for the UN and for the rest of the world to allow anything bad to happen to us. And at that point, when we saw that, I mean, everybody still had some hope, but it was pretty clear that UN was not there, at least not that day, to protect us.
And when you say the Serb troops went to where they thought some of the men in the town were, where was that? What do you think they were doing?
We didn't know what they were doing, but later on we saw on TV that Serb troops were using these vehicles in UN clothes and blue helmets to call Muslim men from Srebrenica to surrender. And they did. They surrendered in large numbers, hoping that UN would protect them.
So the Serb troops were getting the UN people to help them.
They were not, I don't know if they were getting UN people, but they took their clothes and they dressed as UN soldiers.
And what happened to your family? What did your family do next?
We spent 3 days in Potočari, and on the third day we were evacuated from Potočari to Muslim-held territory.
And who's evacuating you there?
There were UN vehicles and Serb trucks and buses. When we came to the front of the line, we realized that Serb trucks were waiting for us. I remember my mother saying, we need to go back, but then it was too late. We were too afraid to make any movement, to be any different from the crowd. So we continued walking towards the trucks. And my little cousin, who was 8 at the time, I remember hearing a Serb soldier, Jetnik, say, take that little boy away. Take him away. In a few years, he will grow up and be on the other side. Just take him away. And at that point, I think my aunt just pulled her little boy into the truck, and he survived.
And what about the rest of your family? Were other males? You mentioned you had a brother.
My brother was only 5 at that time. My father went with other men who tried to get to Tuzla through the woods.
So they had an idea that something was going to happen to men, and they hit the road.
When we came to Srebrenica, as I said, we lived in a suburb. When we came to Srebrenica, the decision was already made that women and children should go with the UN troops and stay with them wherever they are. And men were supposed to separate and go through the woods because they knew if Srebrenica was already falling to Chetniks, all the men were to be executed.
And so did your father make it to Tuzla?
No, he never did.
Do you know what happened to him?
I don't. Me and my brother gave blood samples for DNA identification. We still don't know anything.
After you were loaded onto the buses, where did you go?
We were loaded onto the Serb trucks that day, and on the way to, I think it's called Tishta, where we were ordered to get off the trucks and walk to Muslim-held territories. We were not transported from Potočari to Tuzla. We had to walk to reach Tuzla. On the way to Muslim-held territory, a large rock came into our truck and hit my brother into his head. And we saw that these were Serb children who were lying along the street, who were throwing stones and other things at the trucks, at us, at the buses. It just seemed that it wasn't enough for them, that their fathers and their grandfathers had our fathers. They killed our fathers. They killed our grandfathers. It's just so much hatred because of ethnic difference.
What happened in the camps in Tuzla? You were put in the camps, I assume?
When we came to Tuzla, we spent a couple days sleeping on Dubrave, sleeping outside on huge fields, and a cousin of ours came and found us there. So we spent a couple days at her house, and then we lived in a school that was transformed to a refugee camp.
When did you begin hearing about what happened to the men in Srebrenica?
When we lived in that school, a first group of men came, and they started telling us the stories. They started telling us how basically we should not expect anybody to show up because it was awful what they were doing to them, and they said it was just hard for anybody to make it.
What did your family expect to do at that time? Your father's gone. I imagine you begin to think that he's not going to make it. What are we going to do?
Well, we tried to survive as many other Srebrenica families did. We hoped that our father would show up, my father show up. We believed that he would find us in that school and that we would live together again. We would try to have a life, because at that point I can't call that life. It was just awful.
You're listening to Worldview from Chicago Public Radio. I'm Jerome McDonnell, and I'm speaking with Sejdefa Dozic, and she was a survivor of Srebrenica, and we're talking about what her experience was. How long were you in Tuzla for?
We lived in Tuzla for 1 year.
And you left and went where?
We lived in Sarajevo next. We moved to Sarajevo, to Serb abandoned, almost completely destroyed apartment in Vogostan, which is a little place near Sarajevo.
And did your family talk about what had happened with the UN and what had happened with the war and what was going wrong a lot at this time?
Yes, we did. When we realized what happened to our men, that's when we knew that we were betrayed, that UN troops were not there to protect us. They did not protect anybody, especially because we saw that there were some men who stayed with their families in Potočari. And these men were separated from their families, and teenage boys were separated from their families. They stayed in Potočari, and UN troops did not protect this group of men. They gave them basically to Chetniks, and then they fled territory. They fled Srebrenica.
And did people feel that it was even more than the UN failing, that it was the larger leadership around the world, because people were basically, watching this on the news? People could watch the siege of Srebrenica. They could see the shelling of Srebrenica. It was going down like other safe havens were.
Yes, we could not believe that the whole world was watching what was happening to us, and nobody did anything. Nobody offered any help to us. We just could not believe that this happened. We thought, what is wrong with the world? Why did they send UN troops at the first place to protect us when it seemed the UN redefined their mission? Especially today, when after the recent video showing 6 young Muslim boys from Srebrenica being executed in that way, I mean, the whole world needed to see something like that to say, well, okay, maybe something did happen in Srebrenica. And after 10 years, these war criminals are still enjoying their freedom. So it just seems that there is no justice for Srebrenica and anything that happened in Srebrenica. The world abandoned us that day on July the 11th.
One of the generals who was involved in Srebrenica was convicted of genocide, and his sentence was reduced to an accomplice to genocide, and he's serving 36 years in prison. a lot of people look at that and say, well, it was a landmark decision. The court acknowledged that this was genocide. And is that a first step towards justice?
I don't think he got enough. Maybe it is a first step. These men, these war criminals who come to Den Haag, they get few years in prison, and then after, nice behavior, they get released. And it's just so hard for me, for anybody else from Srebrenica, to believe that, this can happen. They murdered so many innocent people. They took so many young lives, and it's just, they get their freedom. It seems that they get whatever they want.
What happened to some of your friends and neighbors who lived around where you did?
Most of the men never survived. Some of my friends' father are identified and are buried in Porocari, but for most of them, it's the same situation as mine. They never heard anything of their men.
And where did those families go? Did most of them, are they living elsewhere in Bosnia? Where did they go?
Most people from Srebrenica live either in Sarajevo or in Tuzla, suburbs of Sarajevo or suburbs of Tuzla.
And they're still, even though there's a right of return, this is a Serb-held area now. This is part of the Republika Srpska, and yes, people are afraid to go back, even though some Serbs are coming back to Sarajevo and things. It's not working out for Srebrenica people.
When we lived in Valgošća, we were forced to leave the Serb abandoned apartment because that same Serb wanted to return. We had only 7 days to leave that place. Otherwise, the police would throw us out, not allowing us to bring anything with us. So they had more rights in our own country than we ever did. And going back to Srebrenica, people who did not have any other solution had to go back. People who can manage to survive in any way in Tuzla or Sarajevo, they will try to stay there simply because they all know, they all remember their experience in Srebrenica, especially now when Srebrenica is Chetnik's country. Nobody will guarantee them safety. It is not a problem that some Serbs live in Srebrenica. It is a problem that Srebrenica is Chetnik's country today, because it seems to me that after this genocide, Serbs, Chetniks got country. It's like an award for whatever they did. My family, I don't believe we will return to live in Srebrenica. We will go to visit. We will always have the house. The house is burned down. But I don't want anything to happen to my little brother.
And where's your brother?
He lives in Sarajevo with my mother now. They live as refugees in Sarajevo.
And so they stayed in Sarajevo after being kicked out of the Serb evacuated apartment?
Yes. Didn't have anywhere else to go.
How did you come to go to school in the United States and they stay there?
As an A student, I got a monthly stipend from Bosnian American Society, an organization from Atlanta, which is a small group of Bosnians who decided to help children from Srebrenica. I got a monthly stipend from them, and they introduced me to Susan Anderson, a woman who founded and runs Outreach Foundation. So BAS and Outreach asked me if I would like to come to the United States and study here. My answer was yes, and they helped me. They helped me a lot. I had to take SAT and TOEFL test, and I sent my application to Georgia Tech. I was accepted, and Outreach and BAS promised financial help as long as I'm here and as long as I'm studying at Georgia Tech.
What do you want to do? What kind of degree do you want to get?
I am majoring in biomedical engineering right now, and I just finished my sophomore year. I want to go back. I think it's important for me to go back to my country and try to make some difference.
And what about your family in Srebrenica? If they're still living as refugees, would you hope you could, start a different household? Is that a game plan?
Yes. My family is, as I said, they live in Sarajevo as refugees. They're renting an apartment. And my brother, this year, he's going to start high school. And I want to help my family in any way I can. I believe that this experience that I'm getting in the United States will be of benefit to my family. Yes, I want to start a new household there.
What about your mother? How did she adjust to life in Sarajevo in a refugee camp with no husband?
She had to. She and as many other women from Srebrenica did not have a choice. We had to make living. They had to take care of their children. I cannot say that my mom adjusted to this life. What she is trying to do is make sure that me and my brother have better life, that we get a good education and learn as much as we can. She's raised us to believe that there are still some good people, and whatever happened to us, we should never allow it to destroy our lives completely. We should always know, we should always remember it, but we need to try to make our lives better.
Where did you go to school in Sarajevo?
I graduated from Second Gymnasium in Sarajevo.
Is it predominantly refugees? Is it partially
refugees? I was probably one of the few, if not the only one.
How did you end up going there? Is that typical or not typical?
First, I was going to high school in Ilyash, which was also a gymnasium. And when I started receiving financial help from BAS, they asked me if I would like to transfer to a better school. And I always wanted to go to Second Gymnasium. I don't know why. I knew that it was one of the best schools in my country. So they helped me.
I know you're going to the United Nations and are going to tell your story at the UN. Who's bringing you, and what do you have to say? You seem to have a lot of tough things to say to the UN.
Academy of Bosnia is organizing this event. I was asked to tell my story, to tell my experience as somebody who lived through Srebrenica, genocide of Srebrenica. And what I want to say is that we were betrayed by the UN, and I'm angry. I'm angry at them and the whole world that they never stopped killing, that they never saved my father, they never saved my uncles, they never saved anybody from Srebrenica. They allowed so many innocent lives to be destroyed.
Sejdefa, thanks very much for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for your interest.
Sejdefa Dozic was a survivor of the Srebrenica massacre. I talked with her in 2005 on the 10-year anniversary. And at the time, she was invited to address a group at the United Nations at the invitation of Bosnia's UN ambassador. Radovan Karadzic was arrested yesterday and will face charges on the massacre at Srebrenica soon.